a queen reportedly had her husband hideously murdered after she invaded his kingdom with her lover. A wealthy woman faced charges of brewing potions in a skull and having a demon lover. One ruthless queen was said to have stabbed a rival in the chest herself and ordered bishops assassinated in their own cathedrals. A defiant countess famously wiped castle walls with her handkerchief to mock enemy siege engines. A young queen was accused of orchestrating her husband's strangulation with a silken cord, sparking decades of war. These aren't characters from a dark fantasy novel. These were real women from the Middle Ages, whose actions or accusations against them made them notorious and in many ways wanted. Number 5. Lady Agnes Randolph, the Countess, who laughed in the face of an army. They called her Black Agnes, not for the color of her hair, which was said to be dark, but for her fierce spirit and the dark shadow she cast over English ambitions in Scotland. Agnes Randolph was the Countess of Dunbar and March, and in 1338, she found herself in a situation that would terrify most. Her husband Patrick, Earl of Dunbar, was away fighting, leaving Agnes in charge of Dunbar Castle, a key Scottish stronghold on the east coast. King Edward, III of England, wanted Scotland, and Dunbar Castle was on his list. So he sent an army, led by William Montagu, Earl of Salisbury, to take it. Salisbury probably thought it would be easy. A castle defended by a woman? He was in for a surprise. When the English forces arrived in January 1338, they demanded surrender. Agnes's response, according to chronicles, was basically, not a chance. The siege began. Salisbury had catapults, massive stone-throwing machines called trebuchets, and a fearsome siege tower known as a sow. The English hurled giant rocks at the castle walls, expecting them to crumble. After one particularly heavy barrage, a story, says Agnes herself, dressed in her finery, went up to the battlements with her ladies-in-waiting. They calmly took out their white handkerchiefs and began to dust off the ramparts where the stones had hit, as if shooing away a minor nuisance. This act of defiance reportedly infuriated Salisbury and amused the Scottish defenders. The English tried to batter down the main gate with a ram. Agnes and her garrison were ready. They had a massive stone, likely one previously launched by the English, ready on the battlements above the gate. Just as the ram was about to strike, they dropped the stone, smashing the English siege engine to pieces. Salisbury's men tried to use the sow, a large covered battering ram designed to protect soldiers as they approached the walls. Agnes is said to have taunted Salisbury from the walls, shouting a rhyming couplet that basically said, "Beware, Montagu, for your sow will soon farrow," meaning his machine would birth soldiers. Then she ordered a huge boulder, one they'd captured from an English catapult, to be dropped directly onto the sow, shattering it and scattering the soldiers inside. The siege dragged on for 5 long months. Salisbury tried everything. He attempted to bribe a Scottish guard to leave a gate open. The guard, reportedly loyal to Agnes, took the money, then told Agnes about the plot. When Salisbury himself approached the gate, expecting it to be open, Agnes was waiting. She supposedly shouted down that he was a bit early and that she'd hold the gate for him. Then her men dropped the portcullis, narrowly missing Salisbury. If he'd been a moment sooner, he would have been crushed. Food and supplies within the castle must have been a concern, but Agnes managed to get provisions. One account tells of Sir Alexander Ramsay of Dalhousie, a Scottish knight, managing to sneak past the English blockade by sea with boats full of supplies and men, landing them at a postern gate by the sea. This revitalized the defenders and demoralized the English. Salisbury was getting desperate. He even captured Agnes's brother, John Randolph, Earl of Moray, and threatened to hang him in front of the castle if Agnes didn't surrender. Agnes's response was reportedly chilling. She told Salisbury to go ahead, because then she would inherit the earldom of Moray. Whether she truly meant it, or it was a magnificent bluff, Salisbury didn't carry out his threat. Perhaps he feared making her even more determined. Throughout the siege, Agnes was said to be constantly visible on the battlements, encouraging her soldiers, directing defenses, and generally making a mockery of the English efforts. Her actions were not those of a passive noblewoman waiting for rescue. She was an active commander. From the English perspective, she was a stubborn rebel, defying the might of their king and causing significant loss of resources and manpower. They surely wanted her and the castle brought to heel. Finally, after nearly half a year of frustration, with his army depleted and his resources dwindling and with no sign of Dunbar Castle falling, Salisbury gave up. In June 1338, the English lifted the siege and marched away. Black Agnes had held Dunbar. Her defiance became legendary in Scotland, a symbol of resistance. While celebrated in her homeland for the English forces arrayed against her, she was a formidable and frustrating adversary, a woman who refused to break and who through wit and courage kept a vital castle out of their hands. She wasn't a criminal in the common sense, but to her enemies she was a wanted obstacle to their king's ambitions, a defiant force that had to be overcome. Number 4. Joanna I of Naples, the Queen accused of a silken cord murder. Joanna I, Queen of Naples, was born into a world of power, intrigue, and danger. She became queen in 1343 at the tender age of 16 or 17, inheriting a complex and prestigious kingdom in southern Italy. Her grandfather, King Robert the Wise, had arranged her marriage to her cousin Andrew, Duke of Calabria, who was from the Hungarian branch of their Anjou family. This marriage was meant to unite the two branches, but it quickly became a source of tension. Andrew wanted to be crowned king in his own right, not just as Joanna's husband. Many Neapolitan nobles, and perhaps Joanna herself, were not keen on this idea. The situation came to a horrifying head on the night of September 18, 1345. Andrew was at a hunting lodge in Aversa with Joanna. According to accounts, he was lured from his bedchamber by conspirators who told him there was urgent news. Once in the corridor, he was attacked. He fought back, crying out for help. Some say Joanna was in the room and did nothing, or even prevented others from helping, though her defenders denied this. Andrew was eventually overpowered, strangled with a silken cord. Some say it was a rope made of gold and silk, or even his own belt, and his body thrown from a window into the garden below. He was only 17 or 18 years old. The murder caused an immediate scandal throughout Europe. Suspicion quickly fell on Joanna, her cousins, and members of her court who opposed Andrew's ambitions. Andrew's brother, King Louis I of Hungary, was enraged and vowed revenge. He accused Joanna directly of orchestrating the murder of her husband. He wanted her punished, and he wanted the Neapolitan throne for himself as Andrew's avenger and heir. This made Joanna a wanted woman in a very direct political and military sense. Joanna denied any involvement in the murder. She wrote letters pleading her innocence to the Pope. Clement V was her feudal overlord, and other rulers. The Pope, based in Avignon, initiated an investigation. Several members of Joanna's court were arrested, tortured, and executed for their part in the conspiracy. These included some of her closest confidants. However, the formal papal court investigating Joanna herself eventually found her not guilty of direct involvement in the murder in 1348, partly by arguing that if she had been involved it might have been due to malevolent influences or even witchcraft, thus diminishing her personal culpability. Some historians suggest political expediency also played a role in the verdict, as the Pope needed allies. Despite the papal verdict, King Louis of Hungary was not satisfied. In 1347, he invaded Naples to claim the throne and avenge Andrew. Joanna was forced to flee, first to Provence, which she ruled as Countess, and then to Avignon, to plead her case directly before the Pope. To raise funds for her defense and to secure papal support, Joanna sold her rights to the city of Avignon to the papacy. After the initial wave of the Black Death decimated Louis's occupying army, Joanna was able to return to Naples in 1348. However, Louis invaded again in 1350. Wars and truces continued for several years. Joanna eventually secured her throne, but the shadow of Andrew's murder and Louis's enmity never fully disappeared. Joanna went on to marry 3 more times after Andrew. Her second husband, Louis of Taranto, was her cousin and one of those initially suspected in Andrew's murder. Her reign was long, lasting over 3 decades, and was marked by political turmoil, cultural patronage. She was a friend of poets like Boccaccio and Petrarch, though their direct association is sometimes debated, and the ongoing complexities of Italian and papal politics. The wanted status, however, returned with a vengeance later in her life. During the Western Schism, where multiple popes claimed legitimacy, Joanna supported the Avignon Pope, Clement V. This put her in opposition to the Roman Pope, Urban V, who excommunicated her and declared her deposed in 1380. Urban V offered her kingdom to her cousin and adopted heir, Charles of Durazzo. Charles, who had previously been in the service of the Hungarian king, the son of Joanna's old enemy, Louis I, invaded Naples in 1381. Joanna found herself besieged in Castel Nuovo. Her fourth husband, Otto of Brunswick, tried to raise an army to relieve her, but was defeated and captured. Joanna, hoping for aid from Louis I of Anjou, a different Louis, brother of the King of France whom she had named as her heir after falling out with Charles of Durazzo, held out. But no help came in time. In 1382, she was forced to surrender to Charles of Durazzo. Charles, perhaps fearing she could become a rallying point for opposition, or possibly acting on instructions from Hungary, had her imprisoned. A few months later, in May 1382, Joanna I was murdered in her prison at the castle of Muro Lucano. Accounts differ on the method, but many suggest she was smothered with pillows or strangled, a grim echo of her first husband's death almost 4 decades earlier. She was around 56 years old. Her life story shows how accusations of a heinous crime, whether true or politically motivated, could make a queen wanted by powerful enemies seeking her downfall. Number 3. Fredegund, the Merovingian queen, whose rivals met nasty ends. Fredegund, who lived in the 6th century, was a queen of Neustria, one of the Frankish kingdoms in what is now France. She started her career in the royal court, not as a princess, but as a servant. King Chilperic, the first of Neustria, noticed her. At the time, Chilperic was married to Audovera, with whom he had several children. Fredegund became Chilperic's mistress. According to Gregory of Tours, our main and very hostile source for much of this, Fredegund was ambitious and ruthless. Chilperic, perhaps under Fredegund's influence or for his own political reasons, set aside Audovera, sending her to a convent. He then married Galswintha, the sister of Brunhilda, queen of the neighboring Frankish kingdom of Austrasia. Galswintha came with a large dowry and was a Visigothic princess, making it a politically advantageous match. However, the marriage didn't last long. Galswintha complained about Chilperic still keeping mistresses, likely including Fredegund, and wanted to return to Spain, even offering to leave her dowry. Shortly after, in approximately 568, Galswintha was found strangled in her bed. No one was officially prosecuted, but many, including Galswintha's sister Brunhilda, suspected Chilperic and Fredegund. Soon after Galswintha's death, Chilperic officially married Fredegund, making her queen. This event ignited a bitter feud between Fredegund and Brunhilda that would last for decades and result in countless deaths. Brunhilda wanted vengeance for her sister. The period was marked by near-constant warfare between Chilperic's Neustria and his half-brother Sigebert, the First's Austrasia, Brunhilda's husband. Gregory of Tours paints Fredegund as the mastermind behind a shocking number of assassinations and plots, making her wanted by many, especially Brunhilda and her allies. Here are some of the deeds attributed to Fredegund by Gregory. She was accused of sending assassins to kill Sigebert, the First of Austrasia, in 575. 2 young men, supposedly armed with poisoned daggers, scramasaxes with notches filled with poison, struck Sigebert down as he was on the verge of conquering Chilperic's kingdom. Fredegund was said to have personally equipped them. She was implicated in the deaths of Chilperic's sons from his first wife, Audovera. Merovesh, one of these sons, made the mistake of marrying Brunhilda, who was then a widow and his aunt by marriage, without his father's permission. Chilperic, possibly egged on by Fredegund, who saw Merovesh as a rival to her own future children's claims, pursued him. Merevit eventually died, either by suicide to avoid capture, or killed by his own servant on his orders. Gregory suggests Fredegund had a hand in hounding him to his death. Another son, Clovis, was also seen as a threat. After Fredegund's own young sons died of dysentery, she allegedly accused Clovis of witchcraft and of having caused their deaths. He was imprisoned and later killed. His mother, Audovera, was also murdered, supposedly on Fredegund's orders, as was Clovis's sister, Basina, who was abused and sent to a convent. Fredegund was also accused of targeting Bishop Praetextatus of Rouen, who had officiated Merovesh's marriage to Brunhilda, and was a critic of Fredegund. After Praetextatus was exiled and later recalled, he was stabbed while officiating Easter Mass in his own cathedral. Gregory of Tours records that Praetextatus, dying, accused Fredegund. Fredegund supposedly visited him on his deathbed, offering the help of her physicians, which he took as a mockery. She is said to have later had the assassin killed to silence him, and then tortured the woman who implicated her. Even her own husband Chilperic wasn't safe from suspicion when he died in 584, murdered while returning from a hunt. Some contemporary rumors, though not strongly pushed by Gregory, hinted that Fredegund might have been involved, perhaps because he had discovered an affair she was having. However, others blamed Brunhilde or unknown enemies. After Chilperic's death, Fredegund acted quickly to secure the throne for her infant son, Clothar II. She took refuge in Paris and sought the protection of Guntram, Chilperic's other brother and king of Burgundy, who was often a moderating force, but also deeply suspicious of Fredegund. Fredegund was known for her network of spies and assassins. Gregory tells a story of her sending a cleric to assassinate Brunhilde. When he failed, Fredegund had his hands and feet cut off. She then sent 2 more clerics with poisoned daggers, instructing them to ingratiate themselves with Brunhilde and Sigebert's son, Childebert II, and then kill them. This plot also failed. She even supposedly tried to assassinate King Guntram. One story has her sending a young man to kill Childebert II. When he was caught and Childebert spared him, Fredegund allegedly had him beaten for his failure. It's important to remember that Gregory of Tours was a supporter of Brunhilde and Austrasia, and his portrayal of Fredegund is extremely negative. He saw her as a low-born usurper and a malevolent influence. While the sheer number and brutality of the crimes attributed to her are shocking, sorting out verifiable fact from biased propaganda is difficult for this period. What is factual is that these accusations were made and recorded, painting her as a deeply feared and wanted figure by her numerous political and personal enemies. She was wanted dead by Brunhilde, by the families of her alleged victims, and by those whose power she threatened. Despite the chaos and the many enemies she made, Fredegund proved to be a survivor. She successfully protected her son, Clothar II, during his minority, acting as regent. She even led armies and engaged in diplomacy. She died relatively peacefully in her bed in 597, having secured her son's position. Her son, Clothar II, would eventually go on to unite the Frankish kingdoms partly by capturing and executing Fredegund's old rival Brunhilde in a particularly gruesome manner. Fredegund's legacy, largely shaped by her enemies, is that of one of history's most notorious queens, a woman who, if the chronicles are to be believed, literally got away with murder many times over. Number 2. Alice Keiteler, the Dame, accused of witchcraft and demon lovers. In the early 14th century, in Kilkenny, Ireland, lived a wealthy noblewoman named Alice Keiteler. She had been married 4 times, and each of her husbands had conveniently for her died, leaving her richer than before. Her growing wealth and a series of disputes, particularly with the children of her late husbands from their previous marriages, started to breed resentment and suspicion. This wasn't just about money. Dark rumors began to circulate about how Dame Alice acquired her fortune and disposed of her spouses. These rumors would lead to one of the earliest and most famous witchcraft trials in Europe, making Alice a very wanted woman by the church. The trouble for Alice escalated dramatically with the arrival of a new, zealous Bishop of Ossory, Richard de Ledrede, in 1317. Ledrede was a Franciscan friar with a strong conviction to root out heresy and witchcraft in his diocese. By 1324, he was ready to make his move against Alice Keiteler and her associates. The charges laid against Alice were sensational and terrifying for the time. They weren't just about simple poisonings. They delved deep into the realm of demonic sorcery. Bishop Ledred accused Alice of a host of heretical and magical crimes. These included denying Christ and the Church, making animal sacrifices to demons. Specifically, she was accused of sacrificing red roosters and the eyes of peacocks to a demon named Robin Artisan, Robert, son of Art, at a crossroads. Using sorcery to harm and kill her husbands. The children of her previous husbands claimed she had enchanted them to give all their property to her and her favored son William Outlaw, and then hastened their deaths. Consulting with demons and receiving prophecies from them. Having a demonic familiar or incubus. The aforementioned Robin Artisan, who appeared to her sometimes as a cat, sometimes as a shaggy black dog, and sometimes as a black man, an Ethiops. She was accused of having sexual intercourse with this demon, and that he was the source of her wealth and power. Concocting magical potions and powders from horrifying ingredients, like worms, spiders, the hair and nails of dead bodies, the brains and clothes of unbaptized baby boys, and herbs boiled in the skull of a beheaded robber. These concoctions were allegedly used for love spells, hate spells, and to make people sick or kill them. Possessing a staff upon which she greased herself and galloped through an enchanted land with her demon lover. These accusations were detailed in a formal complaint by Bishop Ledred. He wanted Alice and her followers arrested and brought to trial. However, Alice Keitler was not just some poor isolated woman. She was well connected and powerful. Her son, William Outlaw, was a prominent merchant and moneylender in Kilkenny, and Alice herself had influential friends, including Roger Outlaw, the Lord Chancellor of Ireland, who was William's kinsman, possibly uncle. Initially, Alice managed to use her influence to fight back. When Ledred tried to have her arrested, she and her allies had the bishop himself imprisoned for 17 days. This was a bold move, but it only strengthened Ledred's resolve. Once released, he redoubled his efforts. He appealed to higher authorities and managed to get the secular powers to cooperate, at least to some extent. The case created a huge stir. Some of Alice's associates were arrested. One of them, her maidservant, Petronilla de Meath, was flogged 6 times, according to Ledred's own account, until she confessed to all the charges against Alice and implicated her mistress. Petronilla's confession was lurid. She claimed to have witnessed Alice meeting with the demon, making sacrifices, and preparing magical powders. She said Alice taught her these arts. Petronilla became the first person in Ireland to be burned at the stake for heresy and witchcraft on November 3, 1324. Her execution served as a grim warning. Alice Keitler, however, was never brought to final judgment. Seeing the way things were going, especially after Petronilla's confession and execution, and with the bishop relentlessly pursuing her, Alice made a run for it. She managed to flee Kilkenny and then Ireland altogether. Some accounts suggest she went to England. Others say continental Europe. What is certain is that she disappeared from the historical record after 1324. Bishop Ledred was furious that his prime target had escaped. He had to content himself with excommunicating her and having her effigy burned in the marketplace of Kilkenny. Her son, William Outlaw, was also accused. He initially recanted his alleged heretical beliefs to avoid the worst punishments. He was ordered to perform public penance, which included re-roofing the cathedral with lead, a very expensive undertaking, perhaps a way for the church to get at some of the family wealth. He was also supposed to attend Mass daily and feed the poor. However, the dread later accused William of relapsing into heresy and had him imprisoned again. William eventually did his penance and seems to have been reconciled with the church, though his family's reputation was forever stained. The case of Alice Keitler is significant because it occurred relatively early in the period of intense witch hunting that would sweep Europe later. The charges against her, particularly the idea of a pact with a demon, sexual relations with a familiar, and organized sabbats, though not explicitly detailed here as in later trials, were characteristic of later witchcraft accusations. Bishop Ledrede's account of the case, the narrative of the proceedings against Dame Alice Keitler, became an influential document. For Bishop Ledrede and the ecclesiastical authorities, Alice Keitler was a dangerous heretic and sorcerer who had evaded their justice. She was quite literally a fugitive wanted for crimes against God and man, her escape a lingering frustration for those who sought to make an example of her. Number 1. Isabella of France, the she-wolf who toppled a king. Isabella of France, often called the she-wolf of France, was Queen of England as the wife of King Edward II. Born a princess of France, daughter of the powerful King Philip IV, the Fair, she was married to Edward in 1308 as part of a political alliance. She was beautiful, intelligent, and came from a sophisticated French court. Edward II, however, proved to be a problematic king. He was known for his close relationships with male favorites, first Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser the Younger. These relationships alienated many English nobles and, eventually, his own wife. For many years, Isabella endured her husband's behavior and the political instability it caused. She fulfilled her duties as queen, producing heirs, including the future Edward III. She even acted as a diplomat and mediator at times. However, Edward II's reliance on the Despensers, particularly Hugh Despenser the Younger, became intolerable for Isabella and a large faction of the English nobility. The Despensers were seen as corrupt, greedy, and arrogant, usurping royal power and enriching themselves at the expense of the kingdom and other nobles. They also seemed to actively work to marginalize Isabella and confiscate her lands and influence. By the mid-1320s, the situation had reached a breaking point. Isabella was sent to France in 1325, ostensibly on a diplomatic mission to negotiate peace terms with her brother, King Charles IV of France, regarding English territories in Gascony. Once in France, however, Isabella made it clear she would not return to England as long as the Despensers held power. She gathered around her a group of exiled English nobles who opposed Edward II and the Despensers. Crucially, she formed a very close alliance, and likely a romantic relationship with Roger Mortimer, one of the leading exiled Marcher lords who had escaped from the Tower of London. Together, Isabella and Mortimer began to plot the overthrow of Edward II and the Despensers. From Edward II's perspective, his wife and Mortimer were now traitors, actively conspiring against him with a foreign power. He demanded her return. He demanded the French king expel Mortimer, but Isabella refused to come back to England while the Despensers were in favor. She famously declared she would wear robes of widowhood and mourning until this disgrace was removed. She was, in effect, a rebel queen, wanted by her husband and his regime. In September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer launched their invasion of England. They landed at Orwell in Suffolk with a small force of mercenaries, but many English nobles, disaffected with Edward II's rule and the Despensers, quickly flocked to their banner. Edward's support crumbled with astonishing speed. The Despensers, both father and son, were captured. Hugh Despenser, the elder, was executed in Bristol. Hugh Despenser the younger, Edward II's favorite, met a particularly gruesome end in Hereford. He was tried as a traitor and a sodomite, dragged through the streets, publicly hanged, drawn, and quartered. His genitals were reportedly cut off and burned because he was accused of heresy and sodomy, and his head was sent to London Bridge. With his favorites dead and his support gone, Edward II was captured in November 1326 in Wales. He was forced to abdicate the throne in January 1327 in favor of his young son, who became King Edward III. Isabella and Mortimer became the de facto rulers of England, acting as regents for the young king. Edward II was kept imprisoned. What happened to him next is shrouded in some mystery and grim legend. He died at Berkeley Castle in September 1327. The official story was that he died of natural causes. However, persistent rumors, widely believed then and now, claimed he was murdered on the orders of Isabella and Mortimer to prevent him from becoming a rallying point for any opposition. The most infamous story, popularized later, but possibly based on contemporary whispers, is that he was killed by having a red-hot poker inserted into his anus, a method that would leave no external marks of violence and was perhaps seen as a symbolic punishment for his alleged homosexuality. While the poker story is debated by historians, some suggest he was smothered or died of neglect, the strong suspicion of murder at Isabella and Mortimer's instigation hung heavy in the air. If true, it made Isabella not just a rebel and an adulterer, as per accusations regarding Mortimer, but also a regicide. For about 3 years, Isabella and Mortimer ruled England. Mortimer accumulated vast wealth and power, behaving in an increasingly arrogant and tyrannical manner, reminiscent of the Despensers he had helped to overthrow. This began to alienate many, including the young King Edward III, who was growing impatient under their control. In October 1330, Edward III, now 18, staged a coup d'état at Nottingham Castle. With a small group of loyal companions, he entered the castle through a secret passage, surprised Mortimer in his chambers with Isabella, and arrested him. Roger Mortimer was accused of a range of crimes, including treason, assuming royal power, and complicity in the death of Edward II. He was condemned without a proper trial and hanged, drawn, and quartered in November 1330. His execution marked the end of Isabella's direct power. What of Isabella, the she-wolf? Edward III showed more leniency towards his mother. She was not publicly tried or executed. Instead, she was initially kept under a form of house arrest, but later lived in comfortable retirement, managing her own estates. She was not entirely excluded from court, and sometimes appeared at public events. She devoted herself to religious observances in her later years, and died in 1358, at the age of about 63. She was buried, according to some accounts, with the heart of Edward II, or in the habit of the poor Clares. Isabella's story is a dramatic one, of a queen who went from a seemingly dutiful wife to a political exile, an invader, a king toppler, and a regent, only to be eventually sidelined by her own son. For Edward II and his supporters, she was undeniably a wanted criminal, a traitor who had usurped his authority and, many believed, orchestrated his murder. Her actions changed the course of English history, and her reputation as a formidable and to some fearsome figure endures.